Especially if you're a tourist, it's beautiful, it's historic, there are so many interesting things to do. But living there is very difficult. Everything's expensive, really expensive. London's a very dirty city. Moscow's so much cleaner. London is just filthy.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. There was some talk of, we shouldn't listen to Russian music. Of course, that was a complete nonsense. Great music is universal. It transcends all boundaries, all borders. I found a wonderful city full of possibilities, even if you're a foreigner, especially if you're a foreigner, because actually Russians, in my experience, Russians really love foreigners who live here. I feel that in Russia I live a lot more freely than how I lived in London. I can be open and honest with everybody I meet. I don't need to hide anything. I can just live my life and go about my business. With Sasha, we can live our lives and do what we want to do. But again, it wasn't for every single individual. They performed for each other. It's not exactly for the individual. It should never be about the individual. And that's also why I love being a conductor. Because a conductor on stage without an orchestra is just an idiot waving his hands about. When you can walk through the same streets, for example, on Большая Nikitskaya, where the Moscow Conservatory is, when you can walk by the Red Square, the Kremlin, when you walk along the canals in St. Petersburg, when you go to the Mariinsky Theatre, for example, or to the Great Hall of the Moscow Conservatory, to the Bolshoi Theatre, and you just feel the history around you, you just feel the personal connection to everything, then again, you can start to understand the Russian soul. You walk through these streets, and there's a very long history, sometimes very difficult history. And again, when you accept it, when it becomes really a part of you and you become a part of it, I felt very early on a feeling of, this is my home, this is where I am, I belong here, so maybe I have a Russian soul.
Zvezda Holding presents Dynamic Spectrum Talks. Now.
Hello, dear friends. This is the Dynamic Spectrum Talk podcast, a place where we talk to interesting people from all over the world with the obvious aim to find commonalities between us, to erase artificially create dividing lines between peoples and nations. And today we will talk about music, the classical one. And to help us to find all the peculiarities of the classical music today and how it unites us and destroy bridges between people from different continents with different cultural background, we invited a conductor, alumni of the King's College London and Tchaikovsky Moscow State Conservatory, Jeremy Walker. Jeremy, nice to meet you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for finding time to visit us. And our traditional question which we usually ask our esteemed guests, of course, related to their personal story. You were born in Great Britain, and due to some reasons, being already a young man, of course, but not a child anymore, you decided to switch to Russia to change your destiny and to relocate and to live with us here in the Russian Federation. Why so? I think there is a musical plot behind all the story, and I want you to tell us more about it.
Well, it's a long story, but in the case of every good story, it all comes down to love. Or if you want to say, it all comes down to a woman. So when I studied in London, I always thought about moving somewhere else after I finished my bachelor's degree. But I didn't know where. In 2013, I went to a language school in Germany in the summer to improve my German. At that point, I thought I was going to become a singer, and I wanted to improve my German for that reason. And that summer, I met a unique and beautiful and amazing woman with whom I still live to this day. So for 2 years, my future wife, Sasha...
Russian woman,
very important detail. My future wife, Sasha, lived in Moscow and I lived in London. We had a long-distance relationship, but we already knew that we were going to be together forever. So we finished our bachelor degrees at the same time, and we looked at different possibilities where we could live, where we could study, where we could spend the rest of our lives together. We thought about Germany, where we met, thought about London, and of course we thought about Moscow. And in the end, we chose Moscow. In Germany, Sasha's a lawyer. She'd have to start her studies from scratch again. It's not a particularly great idea. In London, everything's expensive, everything's difficult, especially if you're a foreigner. And in Moscow, there's a wonderful musical tradition, one of the greatest in the world. Sasha continued her studies at MGIMO. I entered the Moscow State Conservatory, became the first British conductor to study there, to complete it, and now I'm the first and only British conductor to work there in the opera theatre. And haven't really looked back. I moved here in 2016 in September, and now I can't see myself living anywhere else.
This is a very interesting moment because according to the, let's say, mainstream media and global agenda, London and Great Britain is a place where everyone want to live, everyone want to relocate, because it's like a top of the pyramid. Of course, there is a United States as well, like New York, maybe Los Angeles, such cities, and of course London is something that everybody is dreaming about. But your story proves that there is an opposite direction, and you can find your place and be successful, and I hope happy.
Of course,
outside Great Britain and particularly in Russia.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, London, of course, is an amazing city. Especially if you're a tourist, it's beautiful, it's historic, there are so many interesting things to do. But living there is very difficult. Everything's expensive, really expensive. London's a very dirty city. Moscow's so much cleaner. London is just filthy.
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When you walk in the evening in the centre and there's just rubbish everywhere. It also can be very dangerous there as well. A lot of theft, a lot of mugging, a lot of violence. At some point where I lived in London, in south of London, there were stabbing attacks quite regularly. In Moscow, I feel a lot safer. You see the police on the street, you feel safe. I walk home at night from the metro, I feel completely calm. When I'd walk home from work in London, I'd rush home in case something happened to me. And then you have Moscow. But the first time I came here, I didn't know what to expect. And then I came for the first time in 2015, and then I moved here in 2016. And I found a wonderful city full of possibilities, even if you're a foreigner, especially if you're a foreigner, because actually Russians, in my experience, Russians really love foreigners who live here. Maybe they think we're a bit crazy because we moved to Russia from the West. Maybe they think we're crazy because we've learned your very difficult language.
I know the answer to this question because it's a reaction to the, let's call, to the, I don't want to use the word propaganda, but
we call it what it is.
I cannot find the another synonym because while everyone is, according to the, let's say, media, is pushing you out, if you want to find a better place, you need to go somewhere else, especially to the West. And those who come from the West to live here show some sort of respect to current culture, tradition, and show that going to the West, remember this song by Pet Shop Boys, Go West,
yeah,
sometimes isn't
absolutely
isn't the solution.
Absolutely, and I can say from my own experience, I feel that in Russia I live a lot more freely than how I lived in London. I can be open and honest with everybody I meet. I don't need to hide anything. I can just live my life and go about my business. And with Sasha, we can live our lives and do what we want to do. And I have to say, we live a very nice life in Moscow. We're very happy here.
But let's also stress that to live comfortably here, you studied Russian, and to be honest, the proficiency level of Jeremy is astonishing. So I wouldn't say that I cannot imagine for myself to reach the same result in any other foreign language after 8 years. So it's
no, I think it's all possible. Everything's possible. You just have to work at it. I mean, I came here. I knew a little bit of Russian when I moved here. In the summer of 2015, I actually studied at Moscow State University for 5 weeks. In the summer, there was a language course there. Then in London, I had some lessons as well. I mean, when you don't live in the country, when you're not surrounded by the language, when you're not immersed in the culture, it's so difficult to learn it. Even if you have a talent for it, even if you work very hard, it's just really, really hard. When I came here, it took about 2 years for me to get my Russian to the level where it is now. Of course, I still work at it, I still improve. While I studied at the Moscow Conservatory, we had classes 3 times a week of Russian language. which I went to regularly. Unfortunately, not every student went regularly, but I really made an effort for it.
Because you have motivation.
Exactly. For me, I find it very difficult when I'm in a country and I can't communicate in the same language. Of course, English is a universal language. A lot of people know it, but not everyone.
Not everyone, especially in Russia, maybe in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, the younger generation, that they can express themselves somehow. But in general, I would say that Russia is not an English-speaking environment. It will be difficult to communicate if you're not familiar with the Russian language.
Absolutely. And every time I go on tour somewhere out of Moscow, Kazan or Perm, Novosibirsk, Belgorodska Oblast, wherever, the first thing people say when they meet me is, "Oh, thank goodness you speak Russian." If it's orchestras or reporters or everything, "Oh, you speak Russian, amazing, thank you, it's great." I mean, I know some British people who lived in Moscow for 20 years who haven't learned the language. I don't understand how they function here. I mean, they live very nice lives. They work. They have friends.
Sometimes I meet them at some places like pubs. So they watch rugby or British football or so. And I understand that they live here for a long time because they are familiar with the environment, but they have no clue about how to express themselves in Russian.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people find the Russian language very intimidating, and I understand that. It's a very difficult language. Especially, I really enjoy learning languages. I studied French, German, Latin, Italian. Russian's a lot harder than any of them. So you have, first of all, a different grammatical system. Second of all, you have a lot of rules. But for all of those rules, there are a lot of exceptions. For those exceptions, there are rules.
True.
And for those rules about the exceptions, there are exceptions.
Multi-story system.
When you get past that, when you just accept that sometimes the logic of the Russian language and your logic are very different things, once you accept that and you stop asking why, and you just accept it, then life becomes a lot easier.
But to be honest, we have a lot of similarities, at least. I mean, if you compare Russian language and English language in logics, we have expressions with the same meaning. For example, you say, if you talk about a clumsy person, he's like a bull in china shop.
Yeah.
So in Russian, we have the same, literally same translation of the same expression, same idioma.
Yeah, the same idioms. Exactly. In terms of idioms and expressions, actually, there's a lot in common. I was talking more about in terms of grammar.
Grammar, yeah. It's a disaster for
exactly
British.
Idioms, that's actually something that's much easier for us to learn in Russian, but to get to grips with the Russian grammatical system, in English we say, "I read a book." How many ways in Russian did you say it? Я читал, я прочитал, я почитал. I learned something. Я учил, я выучил. All of those differences.
Yeah, there are different shadows of the same expression.
Exactly.
Which is suitable in particular for this case and not suitable in the other case.
Exactly. Or very simply, say 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Один раз, 2 раза, 3 раза, 4 раза. Why isn't it 5 разов?
I don't know.
Exactly. It's a question that's bothered me for the last 8 years.
There is also a very interesting moment. My wife, she's a teacher of Russian language to foreign students, and she had years ago students, and they were also learning numbers. Like, just mention like 20, 20, 30, 30.
Yeah.
40. Why not?
Exactly. Why?
Why?
Yeah, exactly.
Why 40? No explanation.
It just is. And when you just accept it, your life gets a lot easier.
Very true. But let's get back to music. So, you have been on stage in various places in many countries. So you perform, let's mention, King's College London. Mm-hmm. So conducted the 5th Symphony of Shostakovich in France.
Yeah.
In addition, you were an assistant conductor at the Vienna Opera Academy. So, my question is, how do you think, what's your impression and internal feelings, the taste of music, understanding of music in various countries, in European countries that you've been living and working, are the same or not? And maybe there are differences compared to, let's say, Russian audience and Russian feeling of music, impression on music. What do you think?
Well, it's a question with a lot of different answers,
of course.
I would say.
Same as we discussed now with the grammar.
Exactly. At the end of the day, every audience appreciates great music and appreciates a really good performance. There are some cities and some countries where certain composers are more or less popular, but if we take Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, then everyone loves it. How audiences approach music, what the audience wants out of performance can vary. And if we're talking in very, very general terms, because of course every audience member is an individual who has their own aims in going to a concert, have their own desires. In Europe, there's a lot of attention to style, to the performance being very clean and polished and historically accurate. In Russia, there's more of a need for very emotional interpretation.
Okay. Uh-huh.
I remember back in London, I don't remember who told me, a very experienced, very fine musician said that the most exciting performance, the most interesting orchestra, it's a Russian orchestra who's really motivated to play. Because if you take, let's say, Fifth Symphony, Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, every great orchestra will play it very well. If you have a good conductor, a great orchestra, it will be a very fine performance. But if you have a Russian orchestra who's giving their whole soul to that performance, then it's something on another level. Then it's something that transcends just a good music, emotionally played, very clean, that's fine. If it's a really fine Russian orchestra who's playing their hearts out, then it's something that speaks directly to your heart, directly to your soul. And it's something that is almost impossible to recreate.
You just mentioned the word soul. What's the Russian soul?
Good question. It's something very hard, or maybe it's even impossible to describe. It's something that you just have to feel. When you're here, the more time you spend here, the more you understand Russian people, the more of the country that you see. When you see beautiful streets in Moscow or St. Petersburg, when you see the massive forests that go everywhere, when you see the fields, when you see the dachas here and there, you walk by the river or wherever you go, then you can start to feel the Russian soul. When you sit somewhere, I don't know, a great example for me was we went with my wife's family to Suzdal. And it's
a very, very Russian ancient city.
Beautiful ancient Russian city. There was a festival, a music festival where they had church bells, because of course there are so many churches in Suzdal. And there was an orchestra on the street and church bells sounding. They played Mussorgsky. And you start to feel the Russian soul, especially when you look out, when you can just see the history in front of you. And then I discovered what nastoyki are. Also helped me feel the Russian soul.
Let's tell to the audience that nastoyka is a custom-made alcohol drink.
Yeah, with different flavors, something very Russian as well. And when you can walk through the same streets, for example, on Bolshaya Nikitskaya, where the Moscow Conservatory is, when you can walk by the Red Square, the Kremlin, when you walk along the canals in St. Petersburg, when you go to the Mariinsky Theatre, for example, or to the Great Hall of the Moscow Conservatory, to the Bolshoi Theatre, and you just feel the history around you, you just feel the personal connection to everything, then again, you can start to understand the Russian soul.
I will try to express what is the Russian soul. It's your personal experience of accepting the reality in which particularly these people live here for many, many centuries.
Exactly.
And if your experience tells me that I like it, I accept it, it means that you understand Russian soul. Exactly. Something like that.
It's something like that. Again, it's hard to put it exactly in words, but I think that's very close. Because of course you walk through these streets, and there's a very long history, sometimes very difficult history. And again, when you accept it, when it becomes really a part of you and you become a part of it, I felt very early on a feeling of, this is my home, this is where I am, I belong here, so maybe I have a Russian soul inside.
Do you remember your first performance here in Russia? How was it? How it was?
I do, very well. And actually, I didn't conduct for my very first performance. When I studied in London, I finished my bachelor's degree as a musicologist, but also as a singer. At some point, I thought I'd become an opera singer, but then I made the very wise decision to become a conductor instead. So my first performance in Russia was in December 2016 in the Rachmaninoff Hall of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. A piano concert where I sang 2 songs by the composer Victor Ullmann, who's not very well known, but fantastic composer, really interesting. Maybe it was the first time these songs were performed in Russia. I don't know for sure, but it's possible. That was my first time. My first experience as a conductor in Russia. My first public performance was in November of 2017 when I was in the first year of conservatory. In the same Rachmaninoff Hall, I conducted Tchaikovsky's music. Of course, that's something wonderful. For a foreigner who's not been in Russia very long, with a student orchestra who really helped me, who really gave their all to perform Tchaikovsky in Moscow, it's just something wonderful.
Pyotr Tchaikovsky. Let's also talk a little bit more about this prominent composer. Let's mention a few facts to the audience. Maybe they don't know. Me personally, I know very little about it. So while my preparations to this program, I already discovered something that I didn't know before. There is an interesting fact that Tchaikovsky deeply loved English literature. So, for example, in one of his letters, he says that, let me quote, "I love literature of writers that are full of truth, like Pushkin, Tolstoy," those are Russians, Shakespeare, Gogol, Dickens, and Thackeray. "I cherish only these writers and those who are alike to them. Dickens' novels particularly touched Tchaikovsky's heart. Russian composer passionately read Little Dorrit." And another one, The Bleak House, struck Tchaikovsky so deep that almost with his tears on his eyes, he wrote a letter to his brother to share his impressions and feelings after the reading. So in one way or another, we can say that British culture, Great Britain, England, somehow influenced and contributed to Tchaikovsky's further growth as a composer. But before that, even, before he became famous in 1861, Tchaikovsky visited London for the first time as a secretary or interpreter from the Russian Ministry of Justice. So he was a civil servant back that time. So, and during his trip around London and Great Britain, he was deeply impressed by what he saw, and soon this trip inspired Tchaikovsky to write an orchestral work styled an overture fantasy based on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet with the same title, Romeo and Juliet. And after Tchaikovsky became famous, University of Cambridge awarded him with an honorary degree of Doctor of Music. So this is very interesting fact. So we can say that Tchaikovsky connected our countries from his, let's say, historical perspective, through the music. My question is about how in Great Britain are still attitude to the Russian musical school. Do they respect, the British people?
Of course. Well, Tchaikovsky remains one of the most performed, one of the most loved composers in Great Britain, in the world. Doesn't matter where. The Nutcracker's performed every year, not just the Nutcracker, Swan Lake, his symphonies, his violin concerto, his operas are still performed, even in Covent Garden, in the Metropolitan Opera in New York, everywhere. You can't have a great musical culture in a country if you don't respect the Russian musical school. It's just not possible. Because apart from Tchaikovsky, there are so many other great composers, Rachmaninoff, later on Prokofiev, Shostakovich, if you take the biggest ones. And sometimes there was some talk of, we shouldn't listen to Russian music. Of course, that was a complete nonsense. Great music is universal. It transcends all boundaries, all borders. Most people, I'd say nearly all people, have huge respect and love for Russian music because it's something that speaks directly to your soul. How can you listen to, let's say, the Nutcracker, for example, the famous Pas de Deux, and not want to cry from how beautiful it is? I think every audience around the world loves this music, and there's a reason. It's just genius music, and it's something that exists in its own world. It is something
you cannot cancel.
Exactly. Something you should not cancel. We should all perform music because why? We all need to listen to each other.
We are talking about the classical music that lived for centuries already.
Centuries.
How do you think, from your perspective, for how long this classical music will be in high demand among the society? I mean, in general society, and is it something that that is some sort of a basement or the foundation of our current modern civilization? I mean, the classical music, it determines our mindsets, our feelings of life. How do you think?
Well, it's something that connects us on a very personal level to the past, to the present, and also to the future. There's a myth that classical music is dying. Of course, it's a complete nonsense, because today there are more people listening to and performing classical music than at any other point in history. Of course, the market, if you like, it changes, as it changed in the time of Vivaldi, as it changed in the time of Beethoven, in the time of Puccini, Tchaikovsky, and Shostakovich, and now, of course, it's changing, and we have to adapt. And that's normal. It's the same as in any industry. Because yet music is culture, it's art, but also it's an industry. We have to adapt to trends, we have to adapt to fashions, we need to find ways for attracting new and young audiences. It's all doable, it's all possible. But at the end of the day, I talked about trends. But trends are just in the moment. Really genius music doesn't live in the moment, it lives in eternity. And not just classical music. Any style of music, any art lives on. Because really great artists, great composers, they're not thinking about the current moment, they're not thinking about now, they're thinking about the eternal question, they're thinking about history and the future. So of course it will live on if we work at it. And there are a lot of people who are very motivated who do work at it.
So the classical music will live forever if we do everything right.
Yes. In a short answer, yes. And even if we don't do everything right, if we do most of it right, I think it will still live on. So we have new ways of listening to music. 100 years ago, people listened to records. Now I can take my phone out of my pocket and listen to almost anything. I mean, it's amazing. What will there be next? I don't know. Microchips in your brain with music. I shudder to think. I mean, who knows what things will be like in 100 years' time from now.
Let's stick to analog way of listening.
I agree. But new ways of storing it, new ways of playing it, the sky's the limit. The sky's the limit. At the end of the day, 100 years ago, people listened to Beethoven and loved it. We still listen to it now and love it, maybe even more, who knows. And in another 100 years' time, I'm sure people will still listen to Beethoven or Tchaikovsky or Mozart, Shostakovich. Wonderful music that exists forever.
And to conclude our today's show, could you tell also share your impressions about the people, the audience in the big cities and the minor cities? Because you said that the music will live forever and there is a high demand on it. Is it true compared to different places where you perform? Other people from minor cities, villages are willing to be attached to this music the same way as the people living in the huge cities in different countries, big countries?
Well, thankfully I've had quite a bit of experience in Russia in performing in different places. In Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, if we take big cities, Novosibirsk. In slightly smaller, Yaroslavl, Tver, Perm. And also I've performed in very small places, Stary Oskol, Gubkin, Zheleznogorsk. I'm sure most people don't even know where it is. It's Belgorodska Oblast, Kurska Oblast.
They will Google a lot on the maps to find them.
Absolutely. And there's something special about performing in those smaller towns where people don't have the chance to go to concerts every day or even every week, sometimes even every month. But at the end of the day, they came, they listened. Of course, I was very lucky to be performing in those small towns with the Moscow Virtuosi, which is a wonderful, wonderful orchestra, world famous, world class. And what's great is that people appreciate good music performed by fantastic musicians. It doesn't matter if you're in the capital or in a small town somewhere near the border.
Professionalists will be in high demand all the time.
That's
music
true.
As well.
And the most important thing is that when we went and performed in small towns, we treated each performance as if we're performing in the most important concert hall in Moscow. The thing is, if our approach as musicians, we can't lower our level because, let's say, it's a small town or a concert hall isn't as prestigious. It's our duty, it's our job to perform every concert with integrity, with professionalism, with emotions, so that we can, first of all, so that we can respect ourselves, so that we can respect our audience at the end of the day, so we respect the music and the composers that we're performing. Because as soon as you start to think, oh, it's just a small town, I don't need to play very well, then you should step out of the profession in my book. Because you're already not thinking about it as a musician, you're thinking about it, I don't know, as a businessman, or you're thinking about it in a sort of lazy fashion that not every audience is important. That's complete fallacy. Every single audience, every audience member, every single person is hugely important, because without them, who are we performing for?
I don't know.
Exactly. We're performing for ourselves, and that's not what it's about. We perform music, we share it with everybody.
Only the orchestra, small orchestra on Titanic performed for themselves at the final final hours of the...
Exactly. But again, it wasn't for every single individual. They performed for each other. It's not exactly for the individual. It should never be about the individual. And that's also why I love being a conductor. Because a conductor on stage without an orchestra is just an idiot waving his hands about. It's quite stupid. We don't make a sound ourselves. We have a codependent relationship, and that's something I absolutely love. Together, we make a connection, and we make a connection with the orchestra, we make a connection with the audience, we make a connection with the composer, alive or dead. Even if it's dead, it's a connection through history. It's something that brings everybody together. And at the end of the day, when we're all together, we're greater than when we're just alone.
This is what we do here in the studio. We try to create connections, to connect people from different places, from different cultures, and from even different ethnical groups. It doesn't matter. We have the same foundation, like music, that unites our souls, and it's a unique language everybody can understand.
Yes.
Yeah, if we will develop this common means of communication and common means of transferring knowledge, transferring culture, it means that the world will be better, because there will be less dividing lines. This is what we do.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. In the studio of Dynamic Spectrum Talks, there was a conductor, alumni of the King's College London and Tchaikovsky Moscow State Conservatory, Jeremy Walker. Jeremy, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
See you again.
See you.
Zvezda Holding presents Dynamic Spectrum Talks now.